Hey, so today I'm with the Polyend Synth and a continuation of with my Polyend Engine series. We're going to be talking about the WAVS, which is a 2-channel wavetable synthesizer on the Polyend Synth, and go through all the features just to have an understanding how it works and just how to get the most out of it and on this machine. So enough talking, let's get straight into it. Alright, we're here with the Polyend Synth talking about WAVS, and if you're not familiar with wavetable synthesis, it's a special type of sound file where each part of the sound is sort of in these blocks and it's been cut up so we can actually scrub through the sound. So if I was to just change this one here, as you can see, as we scrub through, it's changing up the waveform, and Polyend Synth has got some really nice features behind it, which I'm going to highlight through this video. But this is just a nice way to just go through all the different elements of this synthesizer and just break them down. So if you're not understanding what they are, this is what's going to cover it. So I have the initialized patch loaded up, so nothing special is going on at the moment. It's a very basic sound. But what we're going to do is just start with the engine itself. So on the Polyend Synth, just so you know how to navigate around, you do have these 9 capacitive touch knobs, and they're definitely going to flash, and they do represent what each one of those are. And then we've got a few buttons over here to go through the different elements of our synthesizer. So first off, we're going to start with the engine, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn the mix all the way to 1, because we're going to focus on one branch, because there's actually 2 wavetables that are playing at once. So pretty much all you got to do is focus on one of these lines. So the first one, or this point here, we can actually change up our waveform. If you go through, you've got a whole bunch to pick for, not the Chiptune 2024, because that's me playing with things. But let's just pick that one. So we've got our wave file loaded. They're relatively quick to load up. And then what we can do is we can change our position. So these are like the snapshots in between. And sometimes you can record the full 1024 different frames and then scrub through individual ones. So the Polyend Synth has some interesting ways where it has 5 or 6 frames, and it does some interpolation in between those to create its sound. But this is a really nice way to give the sound a lot of character, and especially that wavetable flavor. So the next one we're going to talk about is warp, and this is 2 different axes. So if we go left or right, it's going to manipulate our sound in a different way, so either a stretch or a warp. So if we go to the left, we can sort of see it does like a pulse width modulation. So if you have a nice square wave in it, it's going to do wonders there. But this is a really nice way to bend the sound. But if we go the other way, it's actually going to grab the center of it and pull it out. So just 2 different ways to add a little bit of extra color to the sound. So what I'm going to do is just bring both of them back in. So this is the mix knob here, and this is blending between Synth 1 and Synth 2. So we can do the same thing. We can pick a different sound. We can adjust that. So we can do that and get something that is fairly interesting to start with, but we're just playing with the oscillator here, but there's a few other little options for adding color. One being noise. I keep trying to press the buttons, but just adds a bunch of white noise on top, and we can mix that into the signal. And then we've got retro mode, which is very interesting. If you're not familiar with old computers, if you ever heard of the term anti-aliasing, aliasing is like the computer putting the sound directly out. So it's very gritty, very grainy, but if we turn that on, that retro mode is going to allow that alias to come through. So if we have it off, it's very smooth and very nice sounding, but if we turn that on, you can sort of hear some of that digital grit on top, and that's one thing that I like about wavetable synthesis, as it's usually around that sort of early 90s, early 2000s, that digital grittiness of the sounds and samples, and just how the Polyend tracker handles it is something I really enjoy turning on for specific sounds like sort of retro pads and all those sort of jazz. So this one is definitely fun to play with, and it's just an on and off, so you can just turn it on when you need it. So we're going to move into the second menu. So if you hit engine again, it's going to jump across, and this is where we can tune our sound. So we can tune out the 2 different oscillators, and it does it by steps. So we can actually tune by a note and not by ear. So I've got a 5th, but usually I come down to like an octave. It's something a bit different. We can detune them both so they both split out. So if you want a bit of like a chorus sound, you can do it here. and then you can bend the note. If you feel like it's a little bit out and you want to tune it to something else, you can use this one to bring it into square. So the last menu as well is sort of a glide menu, so if you want it to go from there and go up to there, we'll just turn that sequencer off. So it's that sound that jumps between. So if we just go always and add a bit of glide time, so we'll scroll that up, it's that sound there. So if you have a shorter sound, it's going to jump to that sound relatively quickly. And the last one is the volume, so you can sort of adjust how it sits in the mix. So that's just the oscillator section. We're going to pass it through a nice filter, and there's a bunch of them in here. So in the filter button, we do have a variety of different filters to pick from. So if you go from type, anything with LP, it stands for low pass, so it's going to scoop out the higher stuff and just leave the low pass. So that's how it works. You got high pass, and then you got a band pass as well, and a notch which cuts like a little tiny slither out of the sound like that. And there's a variety of different types of filters, so I really feel this one is just sit there and experience. Like if you need a low pass, you just bring up the low pass and then being able to hear the sound. And it also gives you a nice visual on how they're going to work as well. So being a longer taper, it's going to take out a lot smoother section of the high end. If it's quite short and stubby, it's going to be such a hard, gritty filter. We have our resonance as well. We have our cutoff as well. So you can just have those three and move on, but there's a few other nice little options here. One being an envelope amount. So this is working by the ADSR envelope filter. So this envelope here is directly controlling this one. And you can sort of hear it working, but if I just ramp it right up, you can hear how it falls off. And I'll talk about this one in a sec, but let's say I just make this into something really quickly. So you can see how it's connected to that one, and it just gives you a little bit more finer control as well. So you can do something like that. And the last one we have is note tracking, and this allows us to use the pads as a control input. So like how we had the envelope amount, we're controlling it. Low notes equal low number, high notes equal high number, and then we use the note tracking to apply on. So we got a low filter amount, so it's brought it all the way down. But if I play this one, it's opened up that filter a lot more, so allowing us to get more out of our sound. Now I did show a little bit of the ADSR before, but we'll just jump into it. This allows us to sculpt our sound. So if you're not familiar, you got attack, which is like the ramp into the sound. So if we have such a long number, it's going to take a while. So really good for pads, or you have a really short one. For plucky sounds, your decay is sort of like how it comes down to the sustain level. So we can adjust that. Sometimes you just want AS, so you just leave it open and you let it run. You can also take the sustain out and you just get a basic AD envelope. So you can have like a really plucky sound or something a little bit more. And if we bring the sustain back in and then talk about release. Release is when you let go of that key. So sustain will always go until you let go, and then that release kicks in. So having a longer one will make it go out, but if I put it all the way down, it's pretty much just turns off as soon as I release my finger. So you do have a variety of envelopes to work with. So this one's actually controlling the volume, so that number there. We've got the filter, which controls that number there. And then we have one that's just sitting in the background that we can apply to whatever we want when we come to the modulation. So we'll just leave that one for a sec and move on to the LFO. So now we're into LFOs, and really these are sort of like the invisible hands of our synthesizer. These will keep cycling through, sort of like our oscillators were, but they can be applied to all the variables that we've been tweaking so far. But there's a variety of ways that these can be controlled, so we can adjust their frequency. If you don't want to go by a frequency number, you want to actually sync it to like beats per minute or stuff, you can turn the sync on, and then this turns into pretty much divisions of a beat. So you can do it that way. You have a variety of different shapes that you can use to control the LFO, as well as how it's re-triggered. So free running, meaning it's always running in the background, nothing's going to stop it or start it or whatever. You do have one shot, so it's just going to play one cycle of that and not play anymore on a note press, which are really good if you're wanting to create extra envelopes and you run out. and then you do have on note. So when you press a note, it's going to start the cycle again and go from there until you release and then press it again. So modulation is those invisible hands that just take a very basic sound and apply those visible hands, whatever you route around, into something that's really cool. So on the Polyend Synth, you have your input, you have your output, and then you have your amount that you want to apply it about. And you use the corresponding knobs to do that. So like on this one, you do have all the envelopes to apply from around the synth, and you have those 2 LFOs to work with as well. And you got pretty much everything that you can do in the engine as well as the filter and apply them to a bunch of different ways. You're not just limited to what hardware routings are in the synthesizer. And you do have 6 of those to work with, so you have a lot of different routing. So with all that being said, you've created a really awesome sound that you want to take a little bit further and use these control knobs here, because that allows us to take the sound and just live play and tweak certain elements. To get into that menu, you press this button here and go down to macros, and then you have 3 options plus velocity, so how hard you press the button, and like after you press the button, you can sort of wiggle your finger around and it creates a bit more dynamic stuff. So if we just go into the first option here, by the way, you can name these by going down to edit name and doing it that way. But you do have routings already set up. So if I was to just tweak that, we have a few different ones, but let's just focus on the first option. So this C command here, let's say I wanted to route it into something else. So what it's doing is it's going from oscillator position 1 and just adding a whole bunch more, and then oscillator 2, it's taking it away. So how we were scrubbing through those wavetables, this is doing it through that C command. But say I wanted to add something else, we can go down to an empty slot, and then we go select parameter, and when we touch any one of these, it's going to pick it. So let's say if I wanted to drive the warp, now it's put it into there, and then I've got to adjust it. So pretty much any one of these knobs while they're selected happens. And then sometimes I just leave it all the way on at 100%, and then I can hear what's going on. Something like that. It's probably not doing too much sonically, but we can add up to 5 and do some really interesting things here. So you can get a lot more out of it. Just make sure that you name them correctly, because when you're in the main menu here, you can sort of see how it's applied, and those names are very important up here, so you can see how it's all applied. And so I hope this gives you a little bit more to play with wavetables on the Polyend Synth. Now you're probably thinking, what can I make with this instrument? Let's have a little bit of a sound session with some of the presets that are already there. So I hope you got something out of this one, because wavetables do have a lot to offer. It has a very wide range of sounds it can create, from very soft sounds like pads and that to very harsh and abrupt lead sounds. And really that dual wavetable gives us a lot of capacity to do some really interesting things. And one thing I didn't cover is you can actually make those wavetables yourself. So I've done a few videos on this channel already, but what you can do is go into something like Vital. You can create a wavetable there, or you can go into Reaper or your DAW of choice and you can manually stitch together a few of those little wavetables and get the Polyend Synth to actually get some stuff out of there. So I definitely would recommend read the documentation about this synthesizer. It does have a lot of information there, but being able to produce something like this, just to go a little bit more hands-on, just so you can see what's going on over the manual, really does help out. So if you did like this one, definitely give it the thumbs up, because it does tell the algorithm to point to other people that might have a Polyend Synth and trying to learn a little bit more about the engines. And if you do have any comments or queries, please feel free to leave them down below. I do go down there and try and answer as much as I can. And if you did enjoy this one and looking for more Polyend Synth content, well, I've got a bunch of it on my channel and a lot about those engines coming up. So if you want to see that, I look forward to seeing you next time.